Good morning, everybody. My name is Tanya Hedley, and I'm the Director of Electricity for the Utility Regulator. I am going to talk, I've got three main points which I'm hoping to cover. I'm going to talk about the decisions that we're currently making today and show you how they're going to impact on our vision for tomorrow. There's the EU vision and policy for 2050. And currently we're implementing EU directives that are aimed at delivering that policy and vision. And finally, I wanted to cover the offshore position in Northern Ireland today and some of the developments that are happening there, which will have an impact in 2050 as well. I'm aware that Dermot's speech earlier did cover some of this, so I'm hoping I'm going to add value by covering this from a regulatory perspective rather than a network operator perspective. So, let me just... Aha, it works. So just a wee overview initially. The infrastructure that we're building this year on the island of Ireland will still be in use and being paid for by consumers in 2050, and I will expand on that. As mentioned already, the EU has prepared an energy roadmap towards significant decarbonisation on the economy by 2050. And really we need to start now on that roadmap if we're going to achieve these aims in a cost-effective way. And I think it's worth noting that the EU targets are on the UK as a member state. However, in Northern Ireland, energy matters are devolved, and although we have targets, they are not mandatory. However, in ROI, because they are the member state, their targets are mandatory. So, infrastructure built to last. If we look at some of the assets that currently exist, power stations are seen to last greater than 20 years. Kilroot, which we still rely on, was commissioned in 1980. Ballylumford has generation stations that were commissioned in 1972, and they are going to continue to generate electricity on the island of Ireland going forward. Overhead lines that exist. The oldest tower line in Northern Ireland is Larne to Ballyclare, and I think it was commissioned sometime around 1934, and there are no intentions to decommission it. Overhead lines are known on the tower line side. Asset lives of 120 years have been predicted for some. If you think about underground cables, there are cables around Belfast that were put in the 1930s. We are still using them, and there are no intentions to replace them in the next couple of years. Transformers are known to last greater than 40 years, and we have a history of offshore support structures lasting greater than 20 years, although obviously I'm thinking of oil rigs rather than wind turbines at this stage. So I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that any offshore assets that are being installed now could still be in service in 2050. I thought I'd add a wee bit of a history lesson. We've already had one from Dermot on the grid development, but just to add a little bit of the Northern Ireland perspective. The 275 network in Northern Ireland was built between 1973, and the last circuit is actually the Tandragee-Louth interconnector, was 1978. The 110 network was built earlier than that. This slide indicates that it was built up until 1958, but there are new lines currently under construction. So there's some of that that's been erected today, which we will still be using in 2050, I hope. I'm sure you're all aware of the work that's been done in relation to developing new corridors, and those take years to develop. And this is to facilitate the increase of renewable generation that we expect in Northern Ireland and on the island of Ireland. And we have a major investment programme which is about to start for onshore renewables. In fact, it could be said to have started. NIE has indicated they are spending approximately 18 million during their current regulatory period purely for renewable development, and they've made a submission to the regulator's office indicating 306 million to be spent during the next 5-year period. Possibly mention at this stage that we went out with our draft determination for NIE's next price control period last week, and within that we indicated that we want to facilitate renewable development, and we intend to approve all of the renewable investment required as appropriate going forward. The submission for 306 million was made over a year ago, and at that stage there were assumptions on the build of the North-South interconnector. Unfortunately, there's been some delays, so realistically, how much of that 306 million is actually going to be delivered is something we need to consider. The last point I have on this slide is that customers will pay for the assets if they're used or not. As soon as the regulator approves the money and the network is built, customers are committed to paying for that for a 40-year period. So moving on to the European vision. The EU published its low carbon roadmap in March 2011, and we've already had reference to it, and they have published their energy roadmap in December 2011. Within those, there is a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 80% below 1990 levels by 2050, and many people would consider this quite a challenging target. Within those roadmaps, they have considered decarbonisation options, and the main ones are energy efficiency, renewable energy, and there's targets set for that both on the island of Ireland, both north and south, nuclear development, and carbon capture and storage. Their main findings suggest that decarbonisation is possible, and as Dermot showed the graph showing the decarbonisation of the energy industry. Obviously within that, energy efficiency and renewables are a critical stepping stone. And we need investment to modernise infrastructure, and we must start investing now in relation to that infrastructure. Another point that they've indicated, which I'll talk on more, is that a common energy market is vital to keep costs down and ensure security of supply. I think it's worth saying that different European countries have progressed along this roadmap at different paces, and in GB they're actually trying to implement structures to accommodate this. And we have the electricity market reform work that is currently ongoing. That's not me. The energy market reform work that's currently ongoing, and within that the GB government is hoping to put in place a capacity mechanism to facilitate the development of nuclear in Great Britain. So in the European medium-term plan, Europe have created a legislative framework to ensure member states are moving towards the 2050 targets, and they are actively enforcing wherever there is areas they feel that legislation is not being enacted and the work is not progressing in a timely manner. They're also providing funding for strategic infrastructure projects, and the proposed North-South Interconnector has been funded by Europe up until this stage. But in terms of the main challenges for energy policy, I have them listed in the green box, and you've already seen them on one of Dermot's slides. I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of the 2050 targets and the 2020 targets, there is additional concerns about the energy efficiency and how member states are moving forward in relation to that. And therefore, there is an energy efficiency directive that is currently being drafted, which is due to be implemented later this year. And it is suggesting annual targets from 2014 onwards and energy efficiency obligations, which will put additional pressure on member states to deliver those energy efficiency targets that have been set. So where does regulation fit, and what is regulation? I want to start by stating the objectives of regulation are sustainability, security of supply in a cost-effective way. It is our duty as regulators to protect consumers and also ensure the businesses we regulate are financeable, because part of the protection of consumers is ensuring the businesses are able to continue on to supply the services those consumers require. In Northern Ireland, we regulate, I looked at this list and thought, pretty much everything to do with electricity, but obviously the levels of regulation vary. Within the legislation, it talks about competition where appropriate, and it's obvious to me, and hopefully everyone in the room, we don't want multiple networks, so competition doesn't necessarily work when it comes to networks or networks operation. However, we have a wholesale market, and there is an element of competition in that, and we are opening up the retail market in Northern Ireland, and the retail market is already open within Southern Ireland. So, current European initiatives. I want to talk briefly about the third package. Within it, it creates an EU-wide energy regulator, and the organisation that's been set up is called ACER, Agency for Cooperation of Energy Regulators. And this is a way of ensuring that regulation within Europe has consistency, and we are all moving towards a common goal. And all the regulators in Europe will be reporting back to this agency and helping this agency develop the framework required going forward to meet the European targets. There is also a European network of system operators of electricity, which EirGrid and Soli are both participants in. And within that, they have requirements to provide 10-year plans of network development at a European level, and those are obviously going to be published locally as well going forward. The third package requires the operators of the transmission system to be independent of generators and suppliers. And this is due to the fact that the networks are acknowledged to be a natural monopoly, and it's seen that they don't want to be in a position to influence the wholesale market due to having an interest in generation or supply. So there's going to be quite strict guidelines in terms of how those companies are separated and ring-fenced from possibly other parts of the organisation or the parent, so that they can be seen to be totally independent. Transmission system operators in particular are seen to be a group that work very closely with regulators, and it's very important that they are independent and can provide an independent voice going forward as we develop the single market in Europe, not on the island of Ireland. And the energy package also triggers the reform of the energy market on the island of Ireland to increase regional integration, and I'll go into that in a wee bit more depth as well. I also want to mention the Renewable Energy Directive. Again, this is looking at 2050 and starting us along the right path. It's setting mandatory targets for the share of energy from renewable sources for each member state by 2020. And each member state has to produce a National Renewable Energy Action Plan. And in Northern Ireland, we submitted our part of that to DEC, and they published one for all of the UK. But in ROI, they've published their own plan. There is obligations on the member states to prioritise renewable generation connecting to the grid, and there's work being done to show that that is the case both in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland in relation to the rules and systems that are in place. Just expanding a bit more on the market reform. The reason we're reforming the market is we want a larger energy market throughout Europe. With fewer operational restrictions, what the aim is to have the cheapest source of energy, and the idea is that the demand for renewables, when they're available, can be used, and renewables in different locations can balance each other. It may be windy in one place and not another. The EU aim is market coupling, so all the national borders are not barriers to trade. And on the island of Ireland, we have a single electricity market, which is like a forerunner of this. Unfortunately, the way we've designed it is not easily compatible with the target model. And although Europe has required the new market to be in place for 2014, it's acknowledged that due to our small island status off the edge of Europe, we have a bit more work to do, and we've been given a derogation to 2016. There is a significant challenge for all involved to meet this target model on the island of Ireland because of the nature of our systems, but it is seen as essential for decarbonisation of the electricity supply in Europe, and therefore we have an obligation to meet it. So far, the regulatory authorities, both ourselves, the Utility Regulator in Northern Ireland and the Commission for Energy Regulation, have carried out 3 workshops. We've had 3 days of bilateral meetings with stakeholders, and we have just closed our first consultation on this, to which we had 22 responses. There will be further workshops and engagement going forward because this is a very big issue, and it's a work stream we expect to last for a number of years. And I'd like to just highlight that there will be another workshop reviewing responses and looking at our roadmap for up to 2016 sometime in June. So if you look out for that on the All Ireland website. I then want to go into the DETI Strategic Energy Framework, because DETI are responsible for energy policy in Northern Ireland, and in 2010 they published their Strategic Energy Framework, setting a target of 40% of electricity from renewable sources by 2020. In Northern Ireland, the current level is approximately 14% of our energy coming from renewable sources, and the majority of that is wind. The Strategic Energy Framework also aspires to reducing fuel poverty, so there are some conflicts in terms of the investment we're spending now and the impact on consumers. Within the Strategic Energy Framework, DETI has done a piece of work looking at the prices and the impact on households. They've also done a strategic action plan for offshore renewables, and they see that as essential that the offshore renewables are in operation for 2020 to meet the 40% target. They published this in March 2012, and they've completed their assessment. They've identified 8 potential resource zones, and they've covered offshore wind, wave and tidal. NI and Sony are also currently developing a Network 25 plan for Northern Ireland, which hopes to be published before the end of the year, and Sony will be producing a 10-year network development forecast as well. In relation to the offshore, the Crown Estates is currently carrying out a leasing round for offshore in Northern Ireland. 4 have been identified as having preferred characteristics for commercial development, and again I think they were on a slide earlier. The strategic environmental assessment concluded that up to 1,200 megawatts could be installed by 2020 without adverse significant environmental impact. But it's worth noting that the expected offers for the developments are due in September 2012, and the Utility Regulator will be consulting on offshore connection policy during the summer of this year to facilitate this work moving forward in a timely manner. I also wanted to mention the Isles project, which is very similar to the North Seas initiative. The findings of this project were launched in November 2011, and I have been told, I can confidently say, that the final reports will all be published this spring. Its aim was to look at offshore connections and looking at how to connect it in the most effective way going forward. And within that work, I think one of the key findings for me is there is a lot of work required by governments and regulators as well as by engineers to deliver these type of projects. If you look at some of the developments they've considered, the number of government bodies or departments that could be involved to facilitate that is you've the Scottish administration, the Northern Ireland administration, possibly GB and ROI, all having to work together to provide the appropriate permitting for the development to continue. You also have 3 regulatory bodies, and it's important that we work together to facilitate these developments and don't become the critical path item as the technology is developed. So the role of the Utility Regulator going forward. Obviously there's ongoing work towards the 2050 targets, and these include the market reform, the approval of the network investments required to connect renewables, a review of the connection policy for offshore and also for onshore, and certifying the transmission system operators to show that they are independent and can facilitate the work required. And all this has been done in line with our duty to protect current and future customers, which we've already went into in some detail. So I will just summarise to say, I've looked at these pictures. I actually had a phone like this. I can remember that. My phone now is an awful lot lighter and much easier to charge, I'm very glad to say. But the technology has changed an awful lot in those years. Regulation has changed an awful lot in those years. And where we're all going to be in 2050, I'm not going to say. But what I would say is I'm hoping the decisions that I'm involved with today are actually going to be the right decisions to ensure we do get to where we meant to be in 2050. So from a regulatory perspective, I've covered some of the decisions that are currently being made, the European Union vision and policy and some of the implementation that's affecting that, and a wee bit about the offshore developments in Northern Ireland. So I hope you find that interesting, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.